In 2023, a man with a doctorate in neuropharmacology and a lot to lose in the way of credibility stated that he knows for a fact that strange entities from another realm are messing around in human affairs.
Yeah, and their objective is to enslave everyone.
Yeah, and they can turn off your willpower with the flick of a switch.
Hello, and welcome to Velarcana. Here, we share mysteries that often defy explanation. I research the cases, and my husband tells the stories.
And this one begins in a stairwell. They had been there with Bruce from the very beginning, and they stayed with him all the way through adolescence. Years later, he would develop a theory as to who they were and what they wanted. And that theory, well, it wasn't good. His earliest memories of them came to him when he was just 3 years old. The stairs went on forever. At least, that's how it looked to little Bruce. He and his mother were at the bottom. Their apartment was 3 stories up. Bruce climbed one step at a time, and the first few were easy, but then it got harder. Finally, just a couple of steps from the top, his mother reached down and picked him up. And after such a long climb, well, being carried over those last couple of steps gave Bruce the sensation of flying. And at first, well, he was filled with wonder and excitement. But then, the feeling triggered a memory. This had happened before, but when? His thoughts raced. The last time that this happened, he was much higher up. And his mom, well, she wasn't there. They were there. But who were they? His young mind tried to puzzle as he worked to sort out this strange memory.
In that memory, I've been holding hands with 2 humanoid beings on either side of me who look like children. They're almost pure white, not much taller than I was.
He said that they were strange, with overly large heads. Their skin was smooth and hairless. And as soon as the memory had come, it was clear. Even though he was only 3 years old, somehow, somewhere in the past, he had already developed a strong connection with these seemingly magical beings from another realm. He said that he even looked to them as mentors.
They were my mentors. I seemed to recognize that they were much more intelligent and advanced than human adults. In fact, to me, they made my parents look like children.
Bruce loved his parents immensely. They were kind, caring, and compassionate, but he definitely felt a sense of loss for these magical entities who now seemed to be missing from his life. In some strange way, they felt like family to Bruce. Well, little did he know just how evil they really were. Bruce Eugene Rapuano was born in February of 1955 to Joseph and Julia Rapuano. His brother was born a couple of years later. The family lived in New Haven, Connecticut, in an apartment above a funeral home that they owned. And occasionally, Bruce would sneak downstairs and he would watch the embalming process. For some reason, he was never weirded out or afraid. The family moved away from the funeral home and into the suburbs when he was about 7 years old. He was extremely intelligent, and he got high marks all the way through his education. And after high school, he went on to get his doctorate in neuropharmacology. Well, when Bruce was 3 years old, he didn't quite understand these beings, and he thought of them as family. But in July of 1961, he began to develop a different view. One night, he woke up in some strange place, and he found himself surrounded by these bizarre entities. Completely filled with fear, he raised his head and looked around.
About 20 feet in front of me, I could clearly see the beings that, up until that point, had only been vague memories. They were either bathed in a white light, or white was their natural color. And there were dozens of them.
But then, and this is terrifying, it was as if something had stolen his will, and he no longer had the desire to understand exactly what was happening to him, and he just laid back down and let it all go.
I had the vague sense of a hand that was as large as my entire chest, pushing me backward. But I'm not really sure if I actually felt the hand or whether I just imagined it.
Looking back later, Bruce said that the experience was more like, and this is scary. Some unknown consciousness had somehow temporarily stolen his will, and he no longer felt compelled to look around. Well, a moment later, he woke up and it was morning, and he was back on his own bed. And although part of him wanted to believe that this had all been just some strange nightmare, another part of him knew that this had really happened. Then again, dreams can often seem extremely real, right? Well, in any case, dream or not, later on that fall, he'd have an experience that couldn't be a dream.
All these things that happen to you on a repeated and regular basis, and you can't talk about it because you won't be believed.
In the fall of 1961, as Bruce was walking into the kitchen to speak with his father seemingly passed out and then fell to the floor. This had to be a joke, right? Even the way that his father fell was almost gentle and slow motion. Well, Bruce went over to his father, and he started to tell him to stop it. This wasn't funny. Get up. But his father was determined, so Bruce decided that he wasn't going to play along, and he walked away.
I stood up and took a few steps, expecting that he would jump up off the floor. I would turn around, and we would both start laughing. But that scenario never materialized.
And then Bruce's little brother called out, and he asked, "What's wrong with Mom?" Well, Bruce ran into the bedroom, and he found his mother lying on her back in bed, and at first he wasn't sure what to make of it. She didn't exactly look like she was sleeping. It was surreal. With his brother standing on the other side of the bed, looking confused, Bruce reached up and he shook his mother. "Wake up. Stop playing around. This isn't funny." But she did not wake up.
After I stopped shaking her, her head fell back onto the pillow and she didn't move a muscle. My mother was always a very light sleeper. It is still difficult for me to imagine how being shaken like that would fail to awaken her. However, this time, for all intents and purposes, she appeared comatose.
A second later, Bruce stopped shaking her, and then he noticed that his brother was all of a sudden missing. Talk about an eerie moment, right? Well, it gets even stranger. After his father wouldn't get up off of the kitchen floor, his mother was completely unresponsive, and his brother was now missing, Bruce suddenly became completely disinterested in the entire situation. Then an inner voice told him to go out into the hallway and just wait. Well, after Bruce walked out into the hallway, everything changed. It was as if time just skipped a beat, and suddenly it was much later in the day, and his family was buzzing around the apartment as if nothing had happened. This disconnect was more than jolting for Bruce, and he had to take a good moment and work to digest it. And unfortunately, this was not a one-time event. Bruce experienced moments like these all through his childhood. Well, up until this point in the story, Bruce still didn't have any idea as to who these entities were or how they could do the things that they did. But in June of 1965, he'd at least get a glimpse into how they got there. Around dusk on June 19, 1965, Bruce, his brother, and a few of their friends were all outside playing kickball when all of a sudden something huge materialized in the sky.
Standing near the end of the driveway, I was awestruck by the appearance of a stunningly brilliant white light in the sky.
And it wasn't an object like a flying craft or something like that. It was a strange shape too, and at first Bruce couldn't figure out what it was. Well, everyone, of course, stopped playing kickball and just stared at it. What was it? Well, a moment later, Bruce realized what it was. It was some sort of a tear in the fabric of space itself. The children were actually gazing into a hole into another realm. And then, in this incredibly surreal moment, as if things weren't already strange enough, everything became eerily silent. At first, Bruce didn't notice, because this tear in space, of course, had confounded his mind. And as he was looking at it, he was listening for any sounds of any engines, and there was no sounds coming from this tear, so he didn't notice that everything around him was becoming definitely quiet. There was no breeze, no crickets, nothing. It was eerie. And then he noticed that one of the boys to his left had completely stopped moving and was totally motionless, frozen in place. Well, that was unnerving, and it heightened his awareness of the other children, and none of them were moving either. Well, as he was trying to make sense of all of this, the scene abruptly changed and got his attention. One moment there was this strange rip in the sky, and the next moment it was gone, and in its place was a huge ball of fire. And the ball of fire started receding, and then a few moments later it disappeared over the horizon. Well, at some point, all of the sounds returned and everyone started moving again. And afterward, the children, of course, just couldn't stop talking about what just happened. But for some reason, Bruce's versions of events were quite a bit different than everyone else's. They saw things that he never did. And then one of the girls there asked a question.
Bruce, where did you go?
Apparently, for a brief moment, everyone lost sight of Bruce. All the children agreed that just before the rift appeared in the sky, he was there. But at some point, he wasn't. And then, as the fireball was slowly moving away, everyone, including Bruce, was present. Well, Bruce puzzled over this for a while, but he wasn't at all sure what it meant. Were these otherworldly beings so powerful that they could actually manipulate time? And what was so important about him? Why did they keep taking Bruce? Well, after this incident, all he could do was hope that this would be the very last time, and after this, they would just leave him alone. Unfortunately for Bruce, they didn't. The next couple of years were terrifying for Bruce. These entities started showing up much more often, and it was never pleasant. Nightmarish, really. One quick example. Once, Bruce woke up and he found himself just inches from one of these things. He was face to face with it, and now this is beyond terrifying. He couldn't see any eyes or nose or mouth. It was just one glob of nothingness, just this white form in front of him that he knew was a head. Well, these visits continued to happen, and for a while it seemed like this nightmare was just not going to go away. And the worst part about it, at least for Bruce, was that he had no idea why this was happening to him. But then, one night, he was jolted awake, and this inner voice promised him that if he'd come outside, he'd get answers. One summer night, Bruce was jolted awake by a strange surge of electricity. He said he felt like his entire body was being electrified. Well, he sat straight up, and then an inner voice called to him and told him to come outside. You'll get answers. Well, he got up, he left the house, and then he headed across the street. He made his way through some neighboring yards until finally he felt the urge to stop. At first, it was just dark and empty. There was no moon out, and the only sounds were coming from a faint breeze and, of course, the incessant crickets. But then, a soft light appeared in the sky.
I immediately saw an extremely bright light about 75 feet above one of the rooftops.
And Bruce could tell right away that it wasn't any type of ordinary object, and it wasn't a rip in space either. No, floating there, just between him and the clouds, was the one thing that just about every teenage boy simply cannot stop thinking about. Late one summer night, Bruce found himself barefooted, standing between neighboring homes. He was captivated by what he saw. Floating, not too far above one of the rooftops, was now, check this out, a beautiful, glowing woman. Well, as Bruce stared at her, he didn't realize that all of his movements were rapidly slowing. And then they just stopped altogether.
It seemed as if I became paralyzed, but it's more accurate to say that I simply lost the will to move.
You know, this business about losing one's will, that sounds absolutely bizarre to me, and honestly, terrifying. I mean, we are our will, aren't we? Sure, we're our emotions, we're our thoughts, we're our feelings, but our will is what drives us, right? What we want really defines who we are. So to me, losing one's will is like losing one's self. Well, anyway, What a strange predicament for this young man to be in, right? He wakes up in the middle of the night. He runs outside with some hope that he's going to discover what this has all been about, only to find himself gazing up into the sky at a beautiful floating woman. Well, the situation got even stranger when all of his senses began to dull. First, the sights and the sounds all started to fade, until finally only silence and darkness were left. And eventually, he was left with just the slightest sensation of touch. It was as if he was just floating in a sea of nothingness.
The last thing I remembered was the faintest sensation of something touching or being placed on top of my genitals. And then, I found myself completely awake, standing between homes, and the mystical woman was gone.
Bruce made his way back to his house, went inside, and went to bed. And as he got older, these otherworldly visits became less and less frequent until eventually they stopped altogether. And for several years, as Bruce went into adulthood, he really had no idea what to make about those childhood experiences. Well, eventually, he got his doctorate in neuropharmacology, and when he did, he began to understand how certain stimuli affect the human brain and how that can alter a person's behavior. Around the same time, several alien abduction reports entered the public spotlight, and Bruce found himself deeply drawn to those reports.
I was stunned at what I read. It was actually shocking to realize that I could check every one of the boxes in the alien abduction category. Did that mean I was one of them? An abductee? The conclusion of my analysis was both inescapable and overwhelming. Not only was the phenomenon entirely real, it had happened to me.
Using what he had learned in neuropharmacology, all of his own experiences as a data point, and the mountains of evidence from other self-proclaimed abductees, Bruce slowly developed a theory, and eventually he began to believe with 100% certainty in his findings.
The bulk of the evidence has now convinced me that over a number of generations, human embryos have been created by in vitro fertilization by beings from another world. This has been done to create genetically altered versions of Homo sapiens who are under the control of an alien civilization.
He went on to say, and this is terrifying, that there are thousands of what he calls transgenic humans. And these are beings who look exactly like everyone else, and they're currently living right alongside the rest of us, and no one can tell the difference. This alien population is growing, and its goal is to enslave everyone. He said that he is so convinced that what he's discovered is 100% true that he had no other choice but to come forward with what he has, even at the risk of his own career.
This is why I have now gone on the record as a mainstream scientist to tell the world about my own interactions with these highly advanced alien beings. I've relied on my professional background and numerous scientific articles published in peer-reviewed journals to demonstrate the ultra-sophisticated technical capabilities possessed by our alien visitors.
He also wants the world to know that with his understanding of how the brain reacts to outside stimuli and his own experiences in losing his own willpower, these aliens have absolutely no trouble at all in controlling human minds. It's just a flick of the switch for them. And according to Bruce, this alien agenda is so far along that it's almost too late. After researching his case, we had a few questions for Dr. Rapuano, and we got a hold of him, and at first he agreed to come on our show. But then at the last minute, something came up, and he couldn't make it. So Amy reached out to Steve Aspin. He's the author of Out of Time, and in his book, he shares his own experiences, which are very similar to those of Dr. Rapuano.
Well, Dr. Rapuano is under the contention that these beings are enslaving the human race. What are your thoughts on that?
Whether it's some kind of slavery, I really can't rule it out as a possibility. I just don't think you can be very definitive about that.
Okay, if it's not slavery, then do you have any ideas of why they're here?
There may be more subtle. And, if you're dealing with entities that have a 10 million year old civilization, which is nothing in universal terms because the universe is 13.8 billion years old, as you know. So they can have evolved motives and purposes and intentions probably beyond something we can understand at the moment.
Gotcha. So if their motives are beyond our human understanding, then why are they considered nefarious?
It's nefarious in that we have no choice about it. That all adds up to something they're doing to us for their benefit eventually.
What I found most interesting about this story was when they were out at the driveway, the kids were playing kickball, and they look up into the sky and they see a hole in space, right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
You always hear about the UFOs or, some object in the sky. But imagine looking up into the sky and seeing a hole to somewhere else, maybe like a whole nother realm. And then time starts to slow down, right?
Yeah, that is crazy. It's like this rip in the sky almost I found strange. But, when you talked about time slowing down, that's what I found most interesting. When he's talking about his dad de-animating, so to speak, and he's shutting down real slowly, and it makes me think of a robot scene where they're like, "Meow," and then running in and his mom's just out. And I thought about, what is that? Being totally, shut off. People around you are being totally shut off. But then the next thing he remembers is they're all back to just normal activities.
Yeah, weird.
Yeah. I found that super interesting and very strange.
And imagine you're 6 years old and you're running in to see your mom and she's like, just how eerie, right?
Yeah.
I want to get your thoughts on this in just a minute, but first it's time for another gratitude giveaway. So draw a name. If you are new to this concept, we've been blessed with a lot of love from you guys. And every once in a while, when we get a little extra money, we'd like to give merchandise to just one lucky person. It's not a contest. We just put names into a bowl and draw one.
All right, here we go. Drum roll. Miri Styles.
Miri Styles.
Yes.
What I need you to do is go to Fourth Wall, look over our merchandise, pick something for about $25 or less. We'll take care of the cost and shipping. You got to email Amy with what you choose within 2 weeks. So verdict, what do you think? Do you think this really happened?
All right. So I wrote a couple of notes to myself because I didn't want to forget. I knew you were going to ask me.
Amy's Book of Mysteries.
Okay. So one thing I found strange about this was that Bruce seemed to kind of had the smorgasbord or the buffet of all things extraterrestrial, all things alien abduction. Kind of like he went through the buffet line and picked like, I have one of these experiences, one missing time, one abduction, one. So I felt that was a little strange. And even in his book, he says, and now this only happened one time.
Yeah.
Then I tried contacting his brother.
Yeah,
and
you didn't try, you did.
I did contact his brother. And I wanted to ask things like, what was it like growing up in that house? And he was very abrupt with me and said, good luck. Thank you, no comment, and hung up on me.
Yeah.
So the fact he didn't want to say anything also made me a little suspicious. So I feel like this is a case where Bruce had some strange things happen, or he thinks they were strange, and he was really into the UFO phenomenon, and he tried to fit those occurrences with common UFO abductee narratives. And that's my personal opinion. But how about you?
Well, I have to tell you, I was really excited at first because with your phenomenal research, you got a hold of Bruce and we talked to him on the phone and he agreed to come on the show. And then at the last minute, something else came up and he wasn't able to make it. So it's difficult for me because I like to reserve my thoughts on something until I hear the person that went through it talk. So at this point, I have to say, I can't make a judgment. I have no idea. It would be really cool if they really did see this hole in space.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah. I will tell you, I thoroughly enjoyed talking to Steve Aspin. His story is extremely interesting. Maybe we'll do a future story on him, share his mysterious experiences. But this one did remind me back, I can't remember the date, but John Mack did a bunch of research and talked to a whole bunch of abductees. And he interviewed a woman named Jerry over the course of weeks and weeks. We did a report on that. It is fascinating. So if you would like to see it, it's here.
And that one's pretty interesting because Amy actually voices Jerry's words. And people have commented and they've said that Amy gets pretty intense with her emotions.